Um, I don't know. Yeah, I think that would be good. We haven't really rehearsed it. Ken, do you want to join me up here, and do you want a mic so you can talk, or okay? But feel free to correct or let me get you. I'm trying to be helpful without spilling my coffee, and I'm not succeeding in either. Here's your optional chair, Ken.
Thank you. Trouble is, if I sit down, I'll
I
have
know.
to get big. It is a very nice turnout. Check that I'm not early. All right. You ready, Catherine? I think we're ready. All right. Hello. Welcome to Lunch and Learn. It is so exciting to see so many people here today. Thanks for coming out. My name is Jennifer Vanette. I'm Outreach Coordinator here at the Castle Museum, so it's my pleasure to welcome you and to host these types of speaker events. Um, I'll do the housekeeping announcements for you and then hand it over for what you're here for. There is a restroom located just out this back door of the room. And there are some refreshments. There's some coffee, some treats. If we're running low on cookies, I'll put some more out. It'll be okay. And you're welcome to help yourself as you need. Feel free to just like climb right over your neighbors. We're a full house today. It's all right. We'll get close and we'll get to know each other. Our next Lunch and Learn, we have these every second and fourth Tuesdays. So the next one would be November 12th. And that one's going to be really interesting. You probably already know that the Castle Museum is supported by a countywide millage, so thank you very much. And that's how we're able to operate and have a beautiful museum for everyone to enjoy and do programs like this. But we're not the only ones supported by that millage. There are other smaller historical societies around the county that are supported by the same millage. And maybe you've been out to see them, St. Charles, Chesaning, Bridgeport, and Frankenmuth. So we're going to have representatives from each of those historical societies here, and we're going to do kind of like a panel discussion so you can get to know what their museum and space is all about in case, and then maybe you'll get excited about traveling to see them because they're not too far away. So that will be November 12th. If you have preschoolers, or honestly, if you're a preschooler at heart, on this Thursday, we have a preschool story time and trick or treat around the Castle Museum. So, costume, I almost said museums encouraged. Obviously, always, museums encouraged. Costumes encouraged, but not mandatory. Okay, I think that's my housekeeping announcements. So today we have Tom Trombley, our chief historian, and he is going to give some background history of the First Congregational Church, but a major assist from the president of the congregation, Ken Whipper, who has been around this community doing a lot of good work for a very long time. He told me I didn't need to tell you anything except that he's president of the congregation. But he did just celebrate his anniversary for being part of saving the Temple Theater, right? A gem of our community. So, and I know your name has been connected to so many things. So, we appreciate you being here. Oh, and then one more part of this, which they will tell you and remind you, but I'm going to say it now so we just implant this idea in your head. Once we're done having this conversation here, everyone is invited, if they would like, to go down to the church and look at it, tour around the church, because it's just a couple blocks down south on Jefferson here. And so they will remind you of that, but that is a special feature of today's Lunch and Learn. So, without further ado, I think I'm going to hand it over.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you this so that everybody, even online, can hear.
Am I all okay? Can everybody hear me? I have a tendency to project too well for a microphone, so if I do, just let me know. This is really a great pleasure, and really this is an anniversary, not just Ken isn't celebrating one, but this is the 50th anniversary of a story that could have ended up so different than it did. And it's really a story, I was going to wait to the end to say it, but it's really a story I wish would have been repeated so many times in Saginaw. It's really a story of faith and a belief in the community, one that really the congregation of First Congregational Church really had, and so I think we all know there's no holding back and parting the curtain of why we're here today, really to celebrate not the disastrous fire of 1973, but really the miracle of the rebirth of First Congregational Church's building. I'm going to talk about the history of a building. Now, I know congregations and churches are much more than buildings. The buildings are really a reflection of that, an embodiment of that. But what we're going to talk about is a building that really has been a landmark in Saginaw for more than I have fingers and toes to make work, even using some type of counting system. I really owe a great gratitude to my late colleague and very good friend, Jean Beach, who wrote a history of the church in times of sorrow and in times of joy. Jean is greatly missed and left a wonderful legacy for all of us, and actually is being inducted to the Saginaw County Hall of Fame this evening. You know, I always, it goes back kind of to the idea of a church, of the development of Saginaw. You need to know that there were two cities here originally. Does everybody know that? There was Saginaw City, which is on the west flank of the river, and this is East Saginaw. And East Saginaw is really, the development and growth of East Saginaw is really so connected to the growth of development of First Congregational Church, the community in which it was located. Initially, I had jumped ahead. I found a really great history, just an outline of the history of the church and the becoming of the building in an 1873 review of the I found a really great history of the development of the Congregational Church and in the church manual from 1873, which is about less than 20 years after the founding of the church. Initially, when East Saginaw was founded, the Protestant religions basically met members of various I better not do that. Congregations, that was a training method. You sound terrible if you get too new to the speaker. met in the first church that was constructed in East Saginaw, which was the Methodist Church, which was located just 3 blocks west of here on the corner of Washington and South Washington and what was then Germania or is now Federal. In 1857, the Congregational members of the congregation that identified as being Congregationalists decided to move forward with founding their own church. And it was at that time the initial meeting was held in this church, and then later in the day, and this is actually, I said 1857, this is 57, the congregation started to meet, form, and met in the Hoyt block, which was immediately west of the Bancroft Hotel. And this is the only view I have of it right now. Within 3 years, the congregation had grown, and they constructed a church directly across the street from where the Methodist Church was located. They'd always remained neighbors even after they both moved to Jefferson Avenue. And this is located right where the SVRC Marketplace, well, the plaza for the SVRC Marketplace is located today. Within 6 years, within a few years, the congregation had grown. And at the end of the Civil War, there were 3 major congregations undertaking major capital building campaigns in East Saginaw. One was the First Baptist congregation, which was their church constructed during this campaign is no longer standing. It would have been directly across the street on the corner of Federal in South Jefferson. Jefferson Avenue Methodist Church, which is now the building occupied by Kingdom Life Ministries. And the third building, which is the building we're talking about today, First Congregational Church. And to give you an idea of what the community looked like at that time, this would be, this is Federal, or this is during a flood, but it gives you an idea. Here's the tower of First Congregational Church. This is Central Fire Station. And just this would be the area behind the church. And it just gives you an idea of really why people at the time said that it was really amazing what attacks it placed both on the builders of the community to physically construct the building, and also those trying to raise funds to construct a building. And I just want to give you an idea what the church looked like initially. It's really a building that is very recognizable today, but it also is one that has really grown and has several layers of history, one we're celebrating today. This is a photograph that captures the church about 1888. And I don't know why that appeared again, but we will not go back there to the flood zone. But this is the church in 1888. Now, does anybody know and you're exempt from answering this question, Ken. Can anybody tell me who the architect was? Can anybody tell me if there's another building in Saginaw by that architect? Okay, well, I get to share some knowledge for a change. The architect was Gordon Lloyd from Detroit. Lloyd was born in Cambridge, England, and actually he practiced in Detroit, lived across the river. This is, I don't usually go to, find a grade school. That is really, I apologize, but I'm also annoyed at the same time that I can't walk to this area. So this is the sound-free zone. So Lloyd became an expert in designing churches, especially Episcopalian churches. And the Congregational Church is an Italianate style church, and that is different than most of Lloyd's building. Now, since I've gotten to know Gordon Lloyd a little better, or his buildings a little better, obviously can't meet Gordon Lloyd or have dinner with him, but I have discovered there's many parts of your building which are classic Gordon Lloyd. But I know many years ago, when I was much younger, and your building was a little younger, not really young though, it still always was old, I had a tour I gave a tour for the Michigan Society of Architectural Historians. And an architectural historian I knew from Lawrence Institute of Technology afterwards pulled me aside and said, that isn't right. This isn't by Lloyd. It's not in his style at all. And so at that time I hadn't done any research, and Dr. Long had, so I called Dr. Long the next day, a couple days later, and we had a conversation, and he gave me the source, and it indeed is by Gordon Lloyd. It just isn't Gothic Revival. The other church in Saginaw by Gordon Lloyd is, and I think that should come up next, is St. John's Episcopal Church, which is much more in his typical style, but that's on the west side, on Court in Michigan, St. John's Episcopal. And if you look at it, you sit in there, if you're at a service or in there and sit in that church, you really will realize there are a lot of details, especially in the woodwork, the handling and massing of the spaces, which really combine, really are very indicative of Lloyd's work. But that's the other one in Saginaw. Lloyd was incredibly productive through his career. He did, and if you've been to Traverse City recently, what we used to know as the Traverse City Hospital is now known as the Commons. Is now the Commons. He did the main administration building. If you've had dinner at the Whitney Restaurant, at the David Whitney Restaurant on Woodward Avenue in Detroit, he designed the Whitney home. And if you remember the rectory, which went with St. John's Episcopal, there's a lot of visual connection with the details, although the rectory was not on this scale or this elaborate. He also did commercial buildings. One of my favorites from the exterior is All Saints Episcopal Church that he did in Saugatuck, Michigan. This was one of several Episcopalian mission churches that he designed that all used basically the same plan, is my understanding. And it's really just a wonderful Carpenter Gothic design. Remember that little ventilator or steeple on the roof? Just the interior of of All Saints Episcopal Church in Detroit. This is the Congregational Church in Ann Arbor, and I sat in a lecture there, and I got bored with the lecture, and I started comparing details, and I realized, my gosh, this is the same person. Some more details, and you can see in the massing of the windows and stuff, and just, you're not here to have me go through all the Gordon Lloyd commissions, but there are numerous ones. So, I know that architects like to think that their buildings go on forever. Architects, also designers, churches are entities that grow and change, communities change, the world changes. And, this is one of the buildings in Saginaw I can show a photograph of. And for those of you who are familiar with First Congregational Church, it's clearly recognizable today, isn't it? Yeah, very. And here is this little, remember All Saints Episcopal? That is like the light in the refrigerator. Ken and I have had a long conversation. We don't know when it vanished. So don't ask that question afterwards or during the tour. I'm serious. Well, we'll talk about it, of course. The interior of the church, as you'll see today, even after what happened, is still recognizable, but you'll find right from the start, there's changes going on. Look at the organ pipes. look at the decorative painting. And it changes as the church grows. One year for Jazz and Jefferson, Gene Beach and I did, well, Gene did the work. I'm taking credit for something I really just helped find some photographs for her. But we made stereographic views. I think we called it viewiographs. And she hand-tinted photographs of different periods of the church's interior design. And we came up with at least 4 distinctive interior decorative schemes. The exterior of the building, when it was completed, was described as being in the modern white style of brick. By the turn of the century, it had been stained red. And then later on, it was made tan again. Then it went red again. And then after the fire, it kind of became a wonderful patina. So you can make your choice what color you want to call the brick. This is from the 20s, and it still has that ventilator. One of the first additions to the church, there were many, from now on in, the architects who worked on the church were really, and I want to make certain I'm not going on too long here, the architects who worked on the church were basically members of the congregation, and they were really, in most cases, the most prominent architects in Saginaw. Franz and Spence, who both, Robert Franz was a member of the congregation. One of their first buildings that Robert Franz designed, even before he formed his partnership with James Spence, was Bradley House. And in 1929, the interior of the church was redecorated. And this is really what, if somebody is of a certain age, this is the way they'll remember the church as being decorated. By that time, a Tiffany window had been studio's window had been added, but the interior, yet another decorative scheme was added to the ceiling. Light fixtures, which I've been told the candle shades were sometimes crooked on. It also, there's some type of structural issue that Gene found records of that was accommodated with doing it, and I don't quite understand it was, but there's some steel beams that were put in to correct a construction structural issue. And at that time, the balconies which flanked the altar were removed, which would have been only accessible from the rear. The work on the interior was done by John and Bill Wicks. They were brothers of the Boiler Wicks brothers, Wicks Corporation. They were the sons, and they were of that. One brother was trained as an artist, the other as an architect. Does anybody remember Jarvis Yawkey Court? Yeah, right across the street we have a photo. And Jarvis Yawkey Court they designed themselves. Their apartment was on the 2nd floor, and the name Jarvis Yawkey is their middle name. John Yawkey Wicks and William Jarvis Wicks. So they used their middle names, which were family names, for their court. And that was another one of their works. In the last, really, there's only a couple remnants of their works left in Saginaw, one being the altar screen behind at First Congregational Church, and then work they did for the Russ family in a home in the Grove. So this is the way these were photographs taken by Charles Henry Peters Jr. of an Easter service shortly after the redecoration was done, showing the altar in place, screen, all of this behind with the cross was designed by John and Bill Wicks. The decorative ceiling, they're credited with having designed. I haven't found records where who executed it. The finish, which you see, would have been called a Tiffany finish. It was rough plaster that was glazed to give a feeling of age. 1930. Yeah, and the pews come in later. I'm not able to capture, it's a congregation that changed their church interior numerous times, and we'd be here without time for tour if I tried to, and I could not capture everything, but very perceptive, and it helps actually date things. Another thing that happened in the 30s was, and becomes an important part we're not going to go into today, but later as we get nearer to Jazz and Jefferson, we're going to offer another tour. But the architect Alden B. Dow, who had worked in Franz and Spence's office initially, and we won't go into depth on that, and then would train the architect who would restore the church after the fire. Dan Toshek worked in Dow's office. So he becomes like a fulcrum point for the renovation work on the church. But Dow's aunt, Mary, purchased the lot immediately to the south of the church and asked her nephew to design a small home that functioned as a large home. And so that home became a neighbor of the First Congregational Church. And Jean Beach told me that the minister, when she was a child, the child at the church, was not a great fan of modern architecture, nor of Mary Dow's house. Mary Dow was a member of the Methodist Church down the street, and he preached a sermon on the evils of modern architecture. And in between there, and I rearranged somewhat to the detriment of my program, in the 40s, Franz and Spence designed a small chapel to go in between, and it will appear randomly in a few seconds between the Mary Dow house and the church. But Franz and Spence in the 50s is celebrating the centennial of the church. Mary Dow had died. The congregation had purchased her home for $36,000 in 1952 or 53. Franz and Spence designed an addition that it's a little different than what it ended up, but they described how the loggia would bring together the various architectural styles, just as the congregation the church brought together people of varying beliefs and consolidated into a unified whole. And so this is Franz and Spence with their addition. This is the one that I, to the detriment of my program, moved, but that is the chapel that was never constructed, which was the predecessor of what we've seen. So as we enter into the early 70s, the church would have looked very much as it did in the 20s, but with that major addition. And it's at this very time, in 1950, I memorized in 1958, when the dedication is done, just after the church celebrates its centennial, that the Methodist Church is moving away from the west side out to, First Methodist is out to Gratiot. So even then, the Congregational Church really had made a commitment to their original home. So this has not the modern pews, but this is what the church would have looked like on pretty much what it would have looked like on June 3rd, 1973, when things would change forever. The source of the fire was believed to be a pigeon carrying a cigarette butt to the church. And I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to go through these church photographs. The church still had a slate roof. The fire department said the slate roof prevented them from getting at the fire. For those who walk, we can go by that retaining wall where it's still there today. As you can see, part of the roof has collapsed into the sanctuary. The day after the fire, although most of the church's walls were still standing, Saginaw Fire Chief Martin R. Crampton said the main building was a total loss. Only a firewall separating the 106-year-old building from newer additions kept the fire from spreading to Bradley House and the Plymouth House annexes. It isn't a building you expect to see rise again, is it? Within a couple of days, the churches announced that the walls were stable and they were going to restore it. It was called the Phoenix Fund for Rebuilding. There was an insurance settlement, but it did not fully cover the restoration. But I will say at this time, I don't think the church would have had any problem, the congregation or the church board, convincing an insurance company that the building was unsalvageable and to either demolish it or more likely do what many other congregations did in downtown or in Saginaw in the 70s, was simply to move out from the city. Here's a thank you letter for that the church had, the Reverend Isla Pat, thanking people for their donations and also for their support and places to meet. The church, to worship. The church met in Bradley House over the next year. And this just describes, this is an editorial risen from the ashes. The architect for the restoration, as I said, was Dan Toshek. Toshek his father was a doctor. His parents, he grew up at the church, going to First Congregational Church. He certainly at that time probably hadn't really thought much about historic preservation, but he was the architect hired for the project and took it on with great passion, and actually would become the architect that would do the initial conversion of this building from a post office to a museum and office building. And this is Dan Toshek's own home. And this is just another editorial. And at this time, the congregation, while the work was underway, decided as a congregation they were going to make some changes. They had met in the open air in September of that year, couple months after the fire, and they decided they were going to undertake some modifications. And the congregation actually voted on it. One was to remove the columns that had originally separated, had supported balconies on either side of the altar. Another was to rearrange the altar, but still leave the Wicks brothers organ screen intact. And the third was to continue the tradition of having an elaborately decorated ceiling, but to commission a new design in the spirit of the original. And they hired a member of the congregation, Russell Fair, who was at that time, and would be for several decades, an art professor at Delta. He was also, for a time, the director of the Saginaw Art Museum, and he devised a new design created a new design for the ceiling. It's silk screen onto sheets of vinyl, and I'm very fond of it, although I didn't see the original. I will say there were various things done to commemorate what happened. Here are bookmarks that were made from burned hymnals. Does anyone have one of those? I was hoping somebody would come with one that I could coerce into giving us for the museum's collection. Well, I still would have spoken even without that reward. And this is just the project of the rebuilding continuing. This is really a major disaster and a major triumph. And on October 12th, the paper announced it was completed. And these are some photographs of the interior of the church. And of course, it's a building, but it's for a congregation. And here it shows the new restored building filled to capacity. And you know, since 1973, many things have continued to change. Our communities change. We've always been very happy to partner with First Congregational Church on Jazz on Jefferson. Of course, Les Tinknell, who we all miss greatly, he designed a new entrance a few years ago and did other work on the church, and Les did work on the Mary Dow House. So before we go over to the church, and this is just an outline, I just want to, where we start, where this story really, one would expect to have ended. And it just put this in for the original ceiling. And this is what the church looks like today. Of course, for those of us going over to the church, it'll be much more powerful inside. So, I mean, it's really still very much embodies the church that was dedicated in 1868, but it's a building that has so many layers of history and such complexity to it and so many stories. And it's not only visually stunning, a visually stunning building. I couldn't have drawn the words out of a hat in worse order than that. It is not only a visually stunning building, it's really one that it's just has so many powerful stories. So Ken, do you want to add a little more and then explain how we're going to run the tour?
Sure. Thank you, Tom. Can everybody hear, I hope? All right. I'm Ken Whipper. I happen to be the president of the current congregation. And I always tell people, as part of this job, I got a T-shirt. The T-shirt on the back has a nice big target, and on the front it says, "The buck stops here." So I am so pleased to be part of First Congregational Church as it continues to not only exist and live, but to grow. And a great deal of that, if not all, is due to our pastor. And she's here. She comes to us from down by Detroit. Pastor Bonnie Meek Miller. And of course, her partner, Loretta. Now, as we go back to the church, and I hope most of you will be able to do that, if you drive, you can park in front of the church on Jefferson Avenue, and you can park on the side street, Hayden Street. There is a handicapped entrance off Hayden Street. Just inside that door is an elevator up to the sanctuary. One of the exciting things about the church are the windows. And we had an expert that came, and Dale, who came and talked to us about our Tiffany window, of which we have one. But he got really excited about the rest of our stained glass. And I had a number of little handouts of the South Transept, picture of the South Transept. When you're there, I have extra ones there at the church to hand out as well. You can take a look at the windows. The company that made those windows is still in existence. And uniquely, if you want to crawl up to the balcony, you can see where the artist has actually signed his artwork and the name of the company as well. Are there any questions about, yes?
So can the stained glass windows survive the fire?
The stained glass window survived the fire. There are two sets of stained glass windows. There are, I think, there are 4 of them that exist from the very first installation.
Hi, you tried to call? Okay, I'm going to go down there. Bye.
She's got it over there at the receiver. There are a lot of bad jokes about that. I'll spare you. Your question again, please.
Oh, about the windows surviving the fire. And you were telling us that some of them.
Yes, there are 4 windows that were from the original installation. They're very unique, and one of them is easily seen in the south transept as you face east. The other windows, of course, came later, and there are a lot of plaques at the base of each of the windows indicating the primary funding source for that particular panel. Any other questions? Yes.
I can't believe this, and I knew that this happened, but I still can't believe it. Other than the insurance cost, how much did it cost from Johnson Public to restore this church?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it had to be a tremendous amount.
One of the very big advantages of the insurance to the building was that it was insured for that blasted tile roof.
Oh.
And the insurance company had to pay as if it was going to be replaced, the cost of which was dear. And so a great deal of the money to do other things came from not putting tile up on the top. Now, I'm an eternal optimist. Everybody's looking these days at putting metal roofs on their house, putting metal roofs on their barns. And I'm just in great hope that they will find a way to make a metal roof that looks like tile, and we can go back to the appearance of the building when it had the real tile roof. Any questions about going over to the building? Yeah. Oh. Our Sunday attendance is about 44, and it varies, and it's growing. And we find that when we have a lovely family dinner, that the attendance is slightly bigger. The magic of the 4-letter F word, F-R-E-E, F-O-O-D, put them together and you're bound to have a crowd. Yes? The membership of the first Congregational Church back at the time that it burned was principally professional people in the community, the bankers, the merchants, the lawyers, and of course the architects. And so that was the principal congregation at that time. Well, there's a very poor perception of East Side Saginaw, and it's perpetuated by a lot of bad information. We love the East Side. I'm assured by the planning people that in 10 years you will not recognize the East Side of Saginaw as it becomes the medical center of Michigan. Other questions? Well, hearing none, give us a few minutes to get down to the church, open the doors. We'll welcome you through the front door, and we'll welcome you through the handicap restaurant. Restaurant? No. Handicap entrance on Hayden Street. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I hope many of you will join. If you're driving, Ken gave you some instructions on where you can park. I will be walking. It's a couple blocks down if anybody wants to walk. We can do that as a group too. And if you have other engagements and needs to pick up, that is also okay. And we just thank you for coming to this part. So thank you. Have a good day.
You want to repossess your microphone, please?